who I would like to invite here to the panel, who is a distinguished fellow at INSEAD. And we will be happy to count on her presentation as well to try to gather the international knowledge that he has been researching recently in terms of parallelisms between the experience on diversification in Europe and in the Arab countries. I would also like to invite Mr. Faisal Al-Hamoudi, who is a director in the Abu Dhabi DED, who will share with us his views on specific experiences on diversification in Abu Dhabi. And finally, I would like to invite Mr. Mansour Al-Malik, who is a legal director in the 2454 organization in Abu Dhabi, who will talk to us too from the legal perspective on his views on diversification. I would like to invite now Dr. Lawel.
Having more freedom to control expatriate labor influx. But that is a socio-political issue, whether it's good or bad. But in any case, you want to have a balanced social composition. And when we say we have a balanced social composition, that you cannot do without having a high productivity. The third reason is that labor productivity is the major source of international competitiveness. Higher productivity within a firm increases its competitiveness both in the domestic and the international market. So that is extremely important. And then the pursuit of higher productivity, it generates a dynamic of innovation and development of skills. Because as we will see, the underlying factors of increasing productivity generate itself a virtuous circle. So those are, just to remind you, I am sure that you are aware of all these objectives and benefits of higher productivity, but just to remind you of that. Now, let's see what has happened in Dubai. Of course, this applies also to the UAE as a whole. You know, we have not at DED done the work for the UAE as a whole, but we suspect that whatever findings we have for Dubai, by and large, apply also to the UAE. The UAE, at least the UAE non-oil sector. Well, first of all, you can see that GDP growth, that's very quickly, the GDP growth in, if I can use this one, but I think that you can see the pictures. Dubai has experienced very high GDP growth. And by the way, at DED, we have done the historical work over 20 years to see what has happened. But I think history is quite important here. So for the non-oil sectors, the average annual growth rate, this is in constant terms, in constant dirhams, has been 9%, over 9% per year. However, of course, the growth rate has not been the same. And what you can see on the first picture is that there was a very strong pickup in growth between the first period, 1995-2001, and 2001-2007. 2001-2007 was a huge growth. And then there was a slowdown since the international financial crisis in 2007. But not only that, but also because Dubai, and I suspect the same thing for the UAE, they have reached a certain mature stage. So when you reach a mature stage, the growth rate is still high, but look what's happening in Europe or in the US, where the growth rate is much lower now, and serious analysis done by well-known economists indicates that the growth rate is not going to go beyond 2.5%, even if things settle down in those countries. So when you reach a mature stage, you don't expect growth of 5%, 6%, 7%. Now, what is more of relevance here today is productivity. What happened to productivity? And we think that we have done probably consistent work that shows, in fact, what has happened to productivity over the last 20 years. Aggregate labor productivity in Dubai has fluctuated widely over the last 20 years, but the average rate of growth has been positive. And it is 1.7% per year over 20 years. Is that high? Is that low? This actually is a positive finding in the sense that, contrary to what people might have thought or might have read, in fact, productivity has increased. Labor productivity has increased. 1.7% is a respectable growth rate, but we'll see it's not enough. Now, in the lower graph, you see the growth in, actually I cannot really fix it, but you see the growth in productivity compared to the growth in the labor force. And that, if you start, it's normalized. It's normalized. You'll see that the productivity, it's in blue, the productivity increased by 1/3. That is over 20 years, at the average rate of 1.7%, Dubai's economy has been able to increase its labor productivity by 1/3. It is not very high, but it's not too low either. However, the labor force has increased by more than fourfold. That is, the labor force today, or in 2015 to be accurate, the labor force in 2015 was 450 times as high as the labor force in the year 1995. Now, that of course has implications for the sources of growth and for what Dubai's model of development has given us. But let's see first how Dubai compares in terms of productivity growth with other countries. So we picked countries such as Singapore, Korea. The US is normalized. Usually the benchmark is the US, Hong Kong, and of course Dubai is there too. Now, as you can see, the comparator countries have been able to achieve higher productivity growth. But the message here is that when you increase, let's say, labor productivity by 0.3%, from 1.7 to 2%, for instance, after a certain number of years, let's say 10, 15, or 20 years, you are going to have a huge increase in cumulated productivity. So if you see those countries, in fact, on the average, the other countries probably increased their productivity by 2.1% as compared to 1.7% in Dubai. But you see after 20 years how that affects your level of productivity. So it's very important to find ways to raise the productivity growth even by 0.2 or 0.3%. And then, going back to Dubai's model of development, the lower graph shows you the contribution of labor and productivity to GDP growth. Now, as you can see, if you take out the GCC countries, you can see that productivity was a major source of growth. And here, we are talking about overall GDP growth. If you take Dubai, then over 20 years, about 20% of growth, 18% to be exact, has come from productivity gains, while the remaining share, which is about 80%, has come from labor inflows, from the expansion of the labor force. And clearly that shows what you already know, that Dubai's growth, which is relatively high, granted, has been based mainly on labor inflows, not on productivity, although the growth in productivity has been respectable. But given that Dubai has aspired to have very high growth, I remind you that it's 9% over 20 years, most of it has come not from productivity, but it has come from labor inflows. So we have to keep that in mind. And going back to what I mentioned in the introduction, that if we want to have a more balanced social composition, etc., we want to have growth that is originating in productivity growth rather than in labor inflows. Look at the other countries, China, Korea, Hong Kong, etc. The orange part is productivity growth. Now, of course, I'm not comparing to some other countries, such as Oman, for instance. Oman, for instance, has experienced a decline in productivity growth. By the way, these productivity growth rates have been estimated on the basis not on the official figures converted at the official exchange rates, but they have been converted in comparable terms using what economists call the purchasing power parity. That is, you take into account differences in the cost of goods and services across countries. Now, if you look at sectors, productivity in the financial sector, as you may have expected, has been by far the highest among all sectors, followed by utilities. If you look at the picture, you see the financial sector has a much higher productivity, followed by utilities, and then the other sectors lag behind. And when you're talking about productivity, it is the value added, of course, after taking out inflation, it is the value added per laborer, per worker. And you see the financial sector, I suspect it's the same thing in Abu Dhabi also, the financial sector has the highest productivity, followed by utilities. Manufacturing is somewhat in the mid-range, but that depends on what kind of manufacturing you are trying to develop. And the sectors with the lowest productivity are constructions, hotels and restaurants. Now, the problem is that the labor that is utilized is not located necessarily in the high productivity sectors. Look where labor is localized. There are two sectors that stand out as the major employers. Trade and construction. In Dubai, trade and constructions account for 45% of the total labor force. And then if you add transportation, storage, and communication with 13%, that means that about 58% of the labor force is utilized in those three sectors. Now,
Dr. Lawal, I'll give you 2 more minutes to wrap it up.
well, 2 minutes? Okay. I have to rush. Basically, when we're trying to explain labor productivity, there are 3 fundamental factors. One is the investment or capital intensity. How much capital are you using per worker? The second one is human capital. How much human capital, that is the average skills that you are using. And the third one, which is called by economists total factor productivity, is the productivity of both labor and capital, meaning physical capital and human capital. In a nutshell, I'm going to skip this. Investment has been fluctuating. As for human capital, there has been an increase in human capital. As you see, human capital in the labor force, it has been increasing, but beginning in the year 2002, 2003, that increase has been extremely small. And if you see Dubai as compared to other countries, then Dubai has a lower human capital per worker than in other countries. I mean, for the mere fact that there are the unskilled who are in large numbers here. Now, what about this overall productivity? In fact, overall productivity has increased. We talked about 1.7% of increase in labor productivity. Almost all of it came from this residual. And the capital intensity, the physical capital intensity has declined somewhat, and it has just offset the human capital accumulation. So whatever increase in labor productivity has come from, let's say, better management, maybe better processes, etc. So there has been some progress in that area. Now, if you look at labor productivity in selected countries, look at this. I want you to look at this one. Dubai, if you normalize with respect to the US 100 level of productivity. Dubai productivity of labor in Dubai in the latest years, 2012-2014, for which we have data, was about 57% of the US productivity. against nearly 93% in Singapore, 85% in Hong Kong. So about the same as in Korea, and much higher than Malaysia or China, because they have lower per capita income. Then the conclusion here is that achieving relatively high GDP growth while moderating the expansion of the labor force requires, as I said, raising productivity through actions or policies affecting its driving forces. Now, the actions, I'm just going to mention that in 1 minute, but there are other slides about actions that may be undertaken here in order to improve productivity. Well, when it comes to higher quality infrastructure, physical and digital, I think Dubai has made a lot of progress. Then, this is what the international experience shows us, in fact. You have better human capital through facilitating the absorption of new technology and increasing absorption capacity. Of course, education there is very important. FDI liberalization, which enables the transfer of technology, and efficient, what was mentioned in the previous session, efficient and more developed financial systems. So there are a few ideas here. Maybe we can go back to them pertaining to the regulation of competition, the regulation of entry and exit in the economy, research and development, where there is a national strategy and it has been followed by the establishment of new funds to spur R&D, but there are suggestions there too, and the role of the universities to cooperate with the private sector in order to improve R&D. By the way, I want to mention this point, that the UAE until recently spent very little on R&D, 0.7% of GDP, which is very low, and the objective is to increase that to 1.5% by 2021, but there are conditions for this success, and you have here the right incentives to achieve the appropriate training and attract foreign talents, facilitating labor mobility, incentivizing national youth to seek employment in the private sector, and over and this is an optimistic note, and I end with this, over a long run horizon, the over-reliance on cheap and skilled labor and low productivity is expected to wane down, as Dubai will not keep itself out of the fourth industrial revolution. So the industrial revolution by itself is going to change the model of development, and this will lead to higher demand for high skills, etc. And the last sentence, it is only a matter of time for the productivity dynamics to change positively. New challenges will then arise for Dubai, such as the search for high competitiveness to increase the exports of goods and services. Because once you robotize, once you increase the capital intensity and the skill content, then you have to deal with the local market. The local market is going to shrink somewhat, so you have to change towards higher international competitiveness, higher exports in order to sustain long-term growth. And I'll thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone. My name is Wifaq Adnan, and I am here on behalf of INSEAD to talk about the relationship between innovation and productivity. And I'm going to discuss the trends in the UAE as well as the trends abroad, specifically Europe. Okay. I want to also get your attention to see that Omar Maher did some research assistance. He's back there somewhere, and he will answer questions if there are any questions related to the case studies. Okay. So I'm going to start out with the introduction, which is, or the motivation for this, which is why is it that we're even talking about innovation, all right? So early studies have shown that differences in economic growth and differences in productivity, a lot of what was spoken about previously, has not been attributed to the usual inputs of the production function. So we usually have a way of modeling economic growth and or productivity, right? But the usual inputs of the production function, such as physical capital, human capital, labor, do not explain why there are such considerable gaps in productivity, such considerable gaps in economic growth across countries, across firms, across sectors, depending on what unit of analysis you're looking at. So the question is, where are these gaps coming from? And so the research has shown that, for example, in many developed countries where this research was established, these gaps were attributed to something called residual growth, which is growth that we cannot really account for, right? And more than 50% of these gaps have been attributed to this. So this raises questions about what drives residual growth. Where does residual growth come from, okay? And so this inspired the strands of literature about innovation. And what is innovation? What is technical change? And are they the drivers of productivity, revenue, sales, profits, economic growth, and other social capital spillovers, all right? So one strand of literature focused on the contribution of innovation to productivity, and another strand of literature focused on what kind of firms innovate. Are they old firms? Are they new firms? Are they large firms? Are they firms with a large amount of total sales? What are the patterns that we can identify? And so many innovation surveys have been conducted. Starting out in Europe, there's a very well-known survey known the European Community Innovation Survey. And researchers have used the survey to study trends in innovation. All of this talk about innovation and technical change and how it has contributed to growth has led the private sector to spend a lot of money on R&D activities, which is seen as the main input to innovation. And this is especially relevant to natural resource economies, where economic diversification is very important. For natural resource economies, most of them want to use the natural resources to transition from a natural resource economy to a knowledge-based economy so that growth is sustainable. And this is where the connection is between developed countries and natural resource economies, something that is very important for the UAE. To start out, this is just a very basic graph. It is taken from the OECD report on and Eurostat, and it's on the Community Innovation Survey. What it does is it graphs labor productivity as measured in GDP per hours worked. And on the x-axis, it graphs the share of firms that are considered innovators. Now, in the previous discussion, there was in the previous panel, there was a discussion about what it means to innovate. Did you produce a new product? Did you produce a new process? Did you innovate in terms of bringing something new to the firm or something new to the market? And all of that is complicated, but this definition of innovation is very broad. It's the share of firms that are innovating, as in they're bringing anything to the firm, anything innovative to the firm or to the market. And obviously, you can imagine there are all sorts of breakdowns that can be done, but for time consideration, we're just going to look at the main trends. And what we see is that there's a very clear positive correlation for SMEs as well as large firms between innovation and productivity. Now, in European countries, what you see is large firms dominate the scene. Now, what's good is that large firms dominate the scene in some countries more than others. So in Latvia, Poland, Hungary, it's a bit more difficult to innovate if you're an SME than presumably in Germany, right? But there's a lot of variation across Europe, but for the most part, it's pretty clear that large firms dominate, and that is something that all governments have to work on to some extent or another. And I will get to Abu Dhabi regarding that situation. So what do we know about the Abu Dhabi Innovation Survey? What has it revealed to us so far? Well, we know there are strong similarities between the trends we see in Abu Dhabi and Europe. The only reason we couldn't do the US is because the US doesn't have a similar survey to the one that that was done in Europe, and Abu Dhabi modeled its survey on the European Community Innovation Survey. So what we find is 55% of Abu Dhabi firms reported some introduction to innovation, either to the market or to the firm, and that's very close to Europe, very similar. There's a strong positive relationship between firm size and innovation. That is true both for Abu Dhabi as well as European countries, as you just saw. All right? And for both regions, manufacturing firms, the high-tech ones, showed among the highest propensity to innovate. And finally, multinational firms generally do better in terms of the exchange of ideas and knowledge in both areas, and that's simply because there's a larger pool to exchange ideas from. Now, what are the differences, and what can we learn from the differences? That's what we're going to talk about next. So one problem here in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, I'm going to say Abu Dhabi a lot because that's where the innovation survey was done, but obviously this applies broadly to the UAE because there are several similarities across the Emirates. But one issue is that startups lack this sufficient innovation. And to some extent, we think that this is driven by the high level of market concentration. And you'll see a graph showing this. And another issue is that only 25% of firms invest in innovative activities. But once they do invest, they end up investing a lot. Another interesting issue is that government support for innovation is indirect. It's not directly through R&D channels. It's indirect through being a customer or a client, okay, for private sectors. And the construction industry has a pretty high propensity to innovate, although it's a low-tech sector. And one of the case studies we'll do in a few minutes will explain why construction has been quite innovative. And finally, the type of innovation in Abu Dhabi is driven by process rather than product. And this relates to the catch-up effect that was just presented about reaching the frontier of development. It takes a long time for a country to reach a very mature stage of economic growth. And because of that, the innovation has mainly been driven by process-related innovations. And hopefully, now that the UAE has achieved the status that it has, now we can get into product development and increase that level. Just really quickly, these are just some graphs that show some charts that show what is happening. The main sectors of demand for innovation are, again, through government agencies that are operating as customers or clients, actually, okay? And the construction industry. And as you can see here, clients, customers, and suppliers are the main sources of information and cooperation for innovative firms. While this is a really beneficial thing to know, and it's very good for the market because it means the market plays a very large role in driving innovation, one concern is that innovation and growth tend to be vertical rather than horizontal. And a related issue is how SMEs are not included to the extent that they could be in this innovation growth process. Two main issues that have hampered factors in Abu Dhabi are innovation costs are too high, and I think that can also explain why SMEs don't do very well. Startups don't do very well because larger firms are able to absorb the costs of innovation. And once you absorb the cost of innovation, they're more likely to grow, while SMEs are not as likely to do that. And the second issue is market domination by established enterprises. When this survey was done, those two issues, innovation costs are too high and market concentration is high, are the two factors that received the most complaints from private firms. Private firms complained about those two issues more than anything else. So I think policies going forward should focus on these two issues. How did Abu Dhabi do overall in the Innovation Index? It did pretty well. It ranked 3rd and 21st in performance. So the first number is the ranking for the natural resource economies. It ranked number 3 in natural resource economies in terms of performance, and it ranked 21st globally. That's a very high score. And in terms of capacity, it was a little bit less. It ranked number 8 and number 24 for capacity. And capacity and performance, capacity just basically means you have the tools in place to sustain the level of innovation, to sustain growth. And performance is how you end up doing on the indicators of innovation, anything from patents to publications to the actual products, the actual innovations in process. And what were the strengths? The strengths were exploitation and diffusion. So Abu Dhabi has a very good reputation for being an intensive adopter of technology, as was said in the report. And its exploitation mainly comes from the fact that it has an international workforce that is very skilled, and they have been able to leverage that to create relationships abroad. What are the weaknesses? As I said earlier, market concentration seems to come back up, and it especially has an effect on anchor and creation. So the weaknesses are basically that there are a few strong players, and this affects anchoring, which is one of the indicators for measuring innovation. And the main channel that it affects anchoring is through regulation. So there's a lot of regulation on foreign firms, a lot of bureaucratic procedures that firms have to go through, and there's also not enough investor protection. With respect to creation, again, because this is a fast-growing economy and a new economy, we cannot expect for creation to be the same as in developed countries, older economies. So this is an area, I think, that will be interesting to look at 10 years from now, 5 to 10 years from now for the UAE. But it should not be a surprising result. Okay. Some of the policy initiatives that we're proposing include continuing to integrate Abu Dhabi into a more global network, leveraging trade relationships, and incentivizing the private sector to get more involved, as was said in the previous panel. Many people in the previous panel suggested that large private sector companies should invest in startups and should get more involved in SMEs, and I completely agree with that. And also having more infrastructure set up to aid startups, because they are supposed to be the drivers and engines of growth, but they are limited. They are somewhat limited in their scope here. So just a few companies that have been, positive cases that we have looked at. These companies have shown that they have innovated over the years. The first one we're going to do, we did 2 from Dubai, 2 from Abu Dhabi, so that nobody would be upset or feeling, underrepresented, okay? And I didn't pick these, those were picked by our director, and I was happy to, I was happy to research them along with Umar, who conducted the interviews. But in all of these companies, there's a wide range of the different types of innovations. Okay, but what you see in common for all of them is that they've all invested somewhere between 5 to 10% in innovation-related activities, such as R&D, conferences, exhibitions, so forth and so on. So this really speaks to how important it is to help startups gain that capital so that they can invest in the same innovation-related activities. So this, Demara, is a company established in 2005 by Mohammed Sharif. It generates a very high revenue. For time considerations, I won't go through every single detail, but the main idea is they have innovated by creating new products for the hospitality industry, and they have made a name for themselves by attracting brands. The biggest brands come to them so that they can customize, create custom tailored themes for them. So anything from Armani Hotel to Versace to Tom Ford. And they've allocated 10% of revenues to innovation-related activities, especially in-house R&D, which is very important. iGeneral Trading is another one. They have innovated in several ways as well. They are a trading company established in 2006 by Ibrahim bin Shaheen. And the main innovation here is they built a mobile app ecosystem that connects suppliers, distributors, customers from all over, and that has lower transaction costs. And this is a very important tool that they have used. They've leveraged technology, everything from ERP and cloud computing in order to do that, and this has effectively gained them a lot of revenue. They allocate about 5% of their revenues to innovation-related activities. Neopharma, these next two are in Abu Dhabi. Neopharma, established in 2003, produces generic drugs, something that has not been done a lot in the region. They are one of 14 UAE manufacturers that is allowed to register patents, something that is incredibly important for the creation indicator for innovation. And how do they innovate? They have joint ventures with Biocon, and NeoBiocon is the first biotechnology company in the region, not just the UAE. So this is a very important way of integrating yourself into the global network and making sure you leverage the location, the geography of the UAE. It has been able to export, they've been able to export their products to several countries abroad, not just in the Middle East, but also in South and East Asia. They allocate 7 to 8% of revenue to innovation-related activities. And finally is the GPC group, which is a global global planning collaboration group. It was established by Mark Sorensen in the US, but the GIS, they have a group here in the Middle East, and they've been able to use GIS technology to transform geographical data into visual representations. And one great example of that is the building permit system that they've created here in Abu Dhabi. They've overhauled it so that transaction costs are reduced, are drastically reduced actually. And we're able to do that using GIS technology and spatial data infrastructure, which allows sharing, geospatial data sharing between different entities. So I don't want to bore you with the details, but the idea is, if you look at the transactions and the waiting times, they were reduced from 6 months to 2 weeks, and from 90 transactions to 1. So this is a huge gain. This is not just a gain in terms of profits or revenue, but it's a gain in all sorts of ways for all companies. So this is what we mean when we talk about spillovers, right? So in a knowledge-based economy, you want to have an effect not just on the firm, but you want to have a greater effect on society in general. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It is working? Yeah. It is a pleasure to be here at this panel. My name is Faisal Hamoudi. I am working in Abu Dhabi Department of Economy Development, leading one of Abu Dhabi DED initiatives named Takamul. Abu Dhabi Department of Economy Development is leading the economy agenda of Abu Dhabi to achieve sustainable balance, diversity of the economy, of the knowledge-based economy. First, I will give you an introduction about what we are doing in DED. After that, I will do a small presentation about the Takamul program. In DED, as I told you, we are working to, DED is leading of the economy agenda of Abu Dhabi, and we are trying to achieve a sustainable of knowledge-based economy in Abu Dhabi. One of our mandates in DED is innovations. Innovation is a key driver force of our economy vision 2030 and our Abu Dhabi plan. One of our core value in DED is we live by is innovations, and we are trying to build an innovation ecosystem with different partners here in the system in Abu Dhabi, especially with university, industrial, company, government, semi-government, inventors. As you know now, today there are a lot of change in the economy landscape. Innovation is the key driver. The TACAM program is playing a role in DED in filling the gap of innovation ecosystem between all these parties, innovation, university, inventors, industrial. This program has established in 2011 focus to support the innovation cycle, starting from generation of the idea to commercial implementation of this idea to product or service that could support the growth of the economy in Abu Dhabi and especially in the area of technology. In the program, we have two areas. First area, we are trying to support the inventors, individual SME, and other area, we are trying to support industrial. In industry, we are trying to we are providing service for the big company. In example, ADNOC, we are trying to manage the innovation portfolio for ADNOC company. In the last 4 years, we support them around. We did around 20 filed patent for ADNOC company. For SME and individual inventor and company. We are supporting the inventor through the innovation cycle. So let me explain more about the innovation cycle. The innovation cycle, the common program. First, we are trying to support the inventors in the area of awareness and education. So we are trying to educate the inventor about how he can file his patent, how he can protect his invention, how he can take his invention to the market. The second area in the program, the second step in the program is IP asset creations. We are trying to provide financial and legal and advisory support for the inventor to file his patent. As Doctora, she said, the patent is one of many criteria to measure the innovation in the UAE, and the program is playing a core game in supporting the innovation, in putting the UAE among 10 countries in 2021. Today, UAE is in the rank of 41 in the Innovation Global Index, and the program has supported more than 187 patents coming from different sectors: ICT sector, energy sector, clean tech, and renewable energy. The second step in the program, we try to evaluate the technology. And we have two types of evaluations: technical evaluation and deep dive evaluation. In the evaluations, we look for different aspects. The first aspect, legal aspect, technology aspect, and economic aspect. And if we see there are some potential of this technology, we try to provide support in proof of concept, building the last technology readiness level for this technology. And the last step in the program is industry implementation of this technology by securing licensing of this patent and trying to support this inventor and university to start their business as a startup or spin-out. Now I will go through my presentation. Unfortunately, I did the presentation in Arabic. I will speak a little bit about innovation and the TACAM program. The green is the big one. السلام عليكم جميعا. راح اتكلم عن برنامج تكامل، هو واحده من مبادرات دائره التنميه الاقتصاديه. في البدايه راح اقدم مقدمه عن دوافع الابتكار في حكومه الامارات، ومن بعد ذلك راح اتكلم عن برنامج تكامل. طبعا تؤمن القياده عندنا بان اهم الاشياء للوصول الى مرحله ما بعد النفط هي الابتكار. طبعا الوصول للابتكار، التنظيم الجيد من ناحيه تنفيذ الاستراتيجيه الابتكار اللي اعلنت عنها دوله الامارات من خلال مبادرات، من خلال مستهدفات، من خلال مؤشرات، هذا شيء مهم للوصول الى المرحله ما بعد النفط. في الربط بين تنفيذ الخطه الاقتصاديه مع الابتكار نقطه جدا مهمه. وجود كوادر بشريه في مجال العلوم والتكنولوجيا والابتكار نقطه جدا مهمه، وكذلك تصميم نموذج كامل للابتكار نقطه مهمه للوصول الى مرحله ما بعد النفط. تؤمن القيادة في دولة الإمارات أن ثورة الدولة يتم خلقها وليس توارثها وتنافسية أي دولة تعتمد بالكامل على قدرة مؤسساتها الصناعية والخدمية في الخوض في مجال الابتكار. كذلك تؤمن القيادة من أقوال سيدي صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن راشد أن الابتكار في الحكومة هو سر بقائها وتجددها، وهي سر نهضة شعوبها وتقدم دولتها. كذلك لا يمكن نواجه التحديات اليوم بالأساليب القديمة، فيجب الخوض في مجال الابتكار لمواجهة التحديات المستقبلية. الدوافع اليوم في دولة الإمارات للابتكار واحدة منها حكومة الجواد، توقعات العملاء، المقارنات المستمرة، المعرفة للجميع، تنافسية الدولة، الجيل القادم، المشاكل المتعلقة في البطالة، كذلك الثورة الصناعية الرابعة نحن في بدايتها ولها سلبياتها وإيجابياتها. قصة عصرين في شركات مثل شركة كوداك، شركة أسست عام 1880 أكثر عن 133 سنة، 140 ألف موظف كان فيها، مقرها الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. الشركة هذه طبعا كانت ركزت في موضوع اللي هي الفوتوغراف، طبعا بعدم تنبؤها، عدم خوضها في التغيير، سبب من أسباب إفلاس هذه الشركة، لأن التكنولوجيا تحولت إلى الديجيتال فوتوغراف. شركة مثل انستغرام تأسس في عام 2011، طبعا خلال سنتين بيعت بقيمة مليار دولار لشركة فيسبوك. قصة عصرين كذلك تسلا شركة أمريكية معروفة للجميع، شركة تخوض في مجال السيارات الكهربائية. الشركة حاليا من أكبر الشركات المصنعة للسيارات الكهربائية وكذلك البطاريات الخاصة بالكهرباء. هي أول شركة تصنع السيارات الرياضية اللي هي اسمها سيدان، صنعت أكثر عن 110,000 سيارة من خلال السنوات السابقة. كذلك باعت أكثر عن 170 ألف سيارة. الحكومة الأمريكية تدعم السيارات الكهربائية حاليا، راح تكون أسعارها في عام 2017 و 2018 في متداول الجميع. شركات مثل IBM مثل تويوتا بدأوا يخوضوا في مجال تغيير السيارات، خاصة في مجال السيارات الكهربائية. في المستقبل المتقدم راح نشوف شركات راح تندثر بسبب عدم تنبؤها في المستقبل. أنا خذيتكم في قصة عن موضوع الابتكار، بعد راح أدخلكم في الملكية الفكرية. الملكية الفكرية اليوم جزء مهم في موضوع الابتكار، اللي هي معيار يقاس به دولة الإمارات. كلما زادت عدد براءة الاختراع كلما زاد مؤشر الابتكار العالمي لدولة الإمارات في موضوع الابتكار. بعض الأمثلة على براءة الاختراع، أكثر براءة اختراع طبعا براءة الاختراع هي أسد، طبعا ممكن تبيعها، ممكن ترهنها، ممكن تودي ترهنها في بنك أو تستخدمها بطريقة أخرى. أمثلة على براءة الاختراع، أكثر براءة اختراع بيعت لشركة ليبيتور ب 105 مليار دولار. أكثر مؤانك لبراءة اختراع IBM 6500 براءة اختراع بشكل سنوي. قصة مشهورة طبعا أنا بحاول أكون سريع في البرزنتيشن لأن الوقت أنا عندي تقريبا 10 دقائق. راح أتكلم عن مثال الشخص اللي اخترع الغطاء المعدنية للكولا، باعها طبعا لشركة كولا ب 0.0006. طبعا استفاد أكثر عن 90 مليون دولار سنويا من هذا الاختراع. العلامة التجارية اليوم تلعب دور. معظم الشركات انتانجبل اسيت، 90% منها انتانجبل اسيت، وكل معظمها يعتمد على الاي بي، يعتمد على الجود ويل، ومنها العلامات التجارية. أكثر علامات تجارية في عام 2016 هي الأبل، قيمة العلامة فقط 154 مليار دولار. برنامج تكامل بدأ في عام 2011. قمنا بعمل دراسة في عام 2011 عن موضوع براءة الاختراع. كما تحدثنا، براءة الاختراع واحدة من المعايير المهمة في قياس الابتكار في دولة الإمارات. وجدنا أن الرقم جدا منخفض، لا يعكس الرؤية المستقبلية لدولة الإمارات ولا لإمارة أبو ظبي. الرقم تقريبا يعني لكل مليون شخص براءة اختراع واحدة. هذا رقم طبعا قديم من الدراسة عملناها في 2011، والرقم اللي هي براءة الاختراع اللي سجلت في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. رأينا بعد أنه في نقص في موضوع الملكية الفكرية. كثير من المؤسسات الأكاديمية، كثير من إخوان الباحثين يقومون بنشر أبحاثهم من دون تسجيل. طبعا كل ما تنشر البحث كل ما تنشره طبعا تفقد أحقيتك في ملكية هذا الاختراع. النقطة الثالثة اللي وجدناها أنه لا يوجد برامج تدعم موضوع تسجيل براءة الاختراع ولا موضوع تسويق الابتكارات. خلال السنوات طبعا مقارنة بالدول المتقدمة عندهم برامج تدعم موضوع التسجيل وموضوع تسويق الابتكار. موضوع التسجيل موضوع الاكسبنسيف، خاصة للمخترعين، خاصة للشركات الصغيرة والمتوسطة ما عندهم الإمكانيات. التسجيل يكلف من 40 إلى 70 ألف في دولة واحدة. طبعا هنا في دول مثل بريطانيا، دول أخرى، الحكومة تصرف في هذه المواضيع. من هذه النقطة بدأ البرنامج، بدأ في عام 2011. البرنامج ركز في دعم دورة حياة الابتكار من جميع نواحي دورة حياة الابتكار، ابتداء من تأسيس الفكرة، من ثم تحويلها إلى تطبيقات وخدمات تفيد المجتمع، تفيد الحياة الاقتصادية لدولة الإمارات وكذلك لإمارة أبو ظبي. في البرنامج ركزنا على دعم المخترعين والجامعات والشركات الصغيرة والمتوسطة، وركزنا على الشركات الكبيرة لأنها لها دور كبير في تطوير القطاع الصناعي وتطوير الابتكار في إمارة أبو ظبي ولدولة الإمارات. بالنسبة للشركات الكبيرة تحدث عن شركة أدنوك، نحن ندير ملف الملكية الفكرية لشركة أدنوك. بالنسبة للشركات الصغيرة والمتوسطة ركزنا على دعمهم في جميع مراحل دورة حياة الابتكار. في البداية ركزنا في موضوع التوعية، قمنا بعمل أكثر عن 100 ورشة عن موضوع الملكية الفكرية وعن موضوع الابتكار. حاولنا نعلمهم كيف يحول فكرته إلى منتج معين وكيف إذا يحميها. طبعا ركزنا أكثر في موضوع الليجل اسبكت، في كيف انك تحميها عن طريق تسجيلها او عن طريق علامه تجاريه او عن طريق اي انواع من انواع الملكيه الفكريه. من ثم دعم انشاء وتقييم الاصول الملكيه الفكريه، قمنا بدعم موضوع تسجيل براءه الاختراع، قمنا بتوفير دعم مالي من 5 سنوات اي اختراع يظهر من دوله الامارات، للشركات الصغيره، للمخترعين، للجامعات الموجوده، من جامعه مصدر، من جامعه خليفه، من جامعه الامارات، من كل الاسم الموجود في الامارات. خلال ال5 سنوات السابقه دعمنا اكثر عن 187 براءه اختراع. البراءة الاختراعيات من عدة قطاعات: قطاع الاتصالات، قطاع الطاقة النظيفة، قطاع الغاز وغيرها من القطاعات. بعد ما يتم تسجيل براءة الاختراع نقوم بتقييم هذا الابتكار، نطالع في الزوايا القانونية، الزوايا التقنية والزوايا الاقتصادية. المرحلة الأخيرة، المرحلة الرابعة في البرنامج، هي إذا وجدنا أنه في إمكانية لأخذ هذا الاختراع إلى الأسواق، نقوم بدعم موضوع اللي هي النماذج التطبيقية، نوفر دعم مالي في موضوع النماذج التطبيقية، وفي النهاية دعم ترخيص هذه الابتكارات أو إنشاء شركات في مجال التكنولوجيا الحديثة. هذه بصورة مختصرة عن البرنامج، دورة حياة البرنامج. حاليا قاعدين نشتغل في تطوير أكثر في سنة 2017 و2018، عندنا خطة طويلة في تطوير هذا البرنامج. البرنامج هدفه انه تحسين ترتيب دولة الامارات في مؤشر الابتكار العالمي. الهدف الثاني زيادة عدد براءات الاختراع في دولة الامارات. الهدف الثالث ان زيادة دعم اللي هو الشركات الناشئة في قطاع التكنولوجيا الحديثة. الربط بين القطاع الصناعي والقطاع الاكاديمي وحده نقطة مهمة طبعا في بلد الانوفيشن ايكو سيستم. واحده من الاشياء المهمه انك تربط من بين الانفنتور، من بين الجفرمنت، سيمي جفرمنت، مع القطاع الصناعي. تسويق الابتكارات بعد نقطه جدا مهمه وهدف عندنا في البرنامج. نحاول نستخدم القنوات الموجوده في البرنامج والقنوات الموجوده في دائره التنميه الاقتصاديه. هذا بشكل مختصر عن البرنامج. انا حاولت ان اكون مختصر جدا في البرنامج، ان هذه نتائج البرنامج خلال ال5 سنوات السابقه. دعمنا اكثر عن 187 براءة اختراع، ياتي من قطاعات مثل المواد المتقدمه، التكنولوجيا النظيفه، القطاع الصحي، النفط والغاز وغيرها من القطاعات. نفس ما تكلمنا احنا اليوم في مسرعه عشان نسرع عدد براءات الاختراع، لان عندنا هدف كبير ان نكون من بين 10 دول في مؤشر الابتكار العالمي اللي هو الانوفيشن جلوبال اندكس. اليوم احنا في الترتيب ال41، ونسعى من خلال مشاركتنا مع قطاعات اخرى في تسريع زياده عدد براءات الاختراع للوصول الى هذا المستهدف. تم دعم عده شركات ناشئه، تم ترخيص عده ابتكارات ما راح اتحدث فيها، بس ان مستمرين في دعمها وبناء علاقات مع قطاعات مصرفيه، كذلك مع قطاعات صناعيه للاستمرار في دعم المرحله الاخيره في مرحله الابتكار. طبعا عندنا موقع الكتروني نحاول ندعم المخترعين، ندعم الشركات المتوسطه، ندعم كذلك القطاعات الصناعيه. واي استفسارات عن البرنامج يمكنك زياره الموقع شوف تعرفوا اكثر عن البرنامج. ونشكركم لحسن استماعكم، واذا في استفسارات احنا حاضرين.
Mr. Malik. No presentation. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. And this has been a diverse set of presentations, although there is a thread here that I could probably attempt at tracing. And it's the following. Clearly, the UAE represents a rather successful story of innovation and enterprise creation and development. At the same time, there is a question mark on whether or not the productivity performance of the UAE in the long run is the one that could or should have been, and whether that performance in the past would not indicate more pressure to increase the sources of creation and increase of productivity. And that's something that I get from your presentation. The second presentation is more to say, yeah, there has been innovation, especially in certain sectors, but there are still hindrances to promoting more and more diversified innovation. And one of the big hindrances is the fact that actually competition among firms, and especially those that could potentially innovate, is still limited. And probably there is a policy agenda there to promote that would enable more innovation and more competition in the firms installed in the UAE. And the third one is basically telling us there is an institutional framework in which these innovations are taking place. And if you connect the three, it's probably elevating the challenge of what to do next. And in the way this story is coming up, it touches upon these three issues in which this panel was defined. What is the past of diversification? What is the present? And what is meant to be the future? I would like to engage our panelists as well as the public around these three topics and inspired on the individual presentations. I would like to focus, and the question that I have for the panelists first is also the question that I would like the attendees to respond. And when you even express your questions, I would like you to respond to the question I'm asking. Based on your so wide and distinct experience, and looking at the past first, what do you think have been, from your perspectives, the two most important factors in the trajectory of innovation and entrepreneurship in the UAE that have promoted this success story? What are those 1 and 2 factors? There's probably 15, there's probably 20, there's probably 6, but those 2 that come to your minds, remember, this is for my panelists, but also for you, because if you analyze, if you just look at who are here and who are there, we all represent the 2 sides of the table, and this question is relevant to both sides. Let's start with Dr.
Yeah, when it comes to innovation, I think that we have to bear in mind that to be transparent, that the results so far have not been that great. Going back to the spending on R&D, which I said was relatively low, but when you look at the output, it is also relatively low. And when you look at the efficiency in terms of even the little 0.7% spent as compared to the results, there is a problem there. So looking ahead, by 2021, the UAE will be spending something like 20 billion dirhams on R&D. It's extremely important to get ready for it, because whatever has been spent already has not produced, in terms of patents, let's say, great results. So I think it's extremely important for the country to be ready for it, in terms of human capital, in terms of accountability also of firms. It's not because we want to promote SMEs, let's say, that we should be ready to finance them without accountability. It's extremely important for them to be accountable. And I think that the UAE can afford and can have the political will to help only those SMEs who are likely to succeed. One of the recommendations, I don't know why that's not done. For the youth, in order to be supported by the government as a startup, you need, for instance, an engineering plus MBA. I don't think it's asking too much for a young aspiring to be entrepreneur to do that. The other thing is that, and I'm sorry to say this, that I have always wondered, why don't we set up here in this country elite schools from the primary school? You select the elites, and you prepare them then, when they finish high school, elite high school also, to go to the best universities in the world. Harvard, Berkeley, Chicago, Stanford, what have you. And then to be trained to come back here and lead research institutions. And of course, with that, you need to have the incentives. Let me just tell you what happens in Singapore. Singapore, as you know, has moved up from one sector to the other. Now they are in pharmaceuticals. When they decided to attract multinationals and to set up laboratories, the multinationals told them, well, you don't have the skills for that. You need to have specialized skills. So what do you need? We need 500 engineers, PhD engineers in pharmaceuticals. You'll get them in 5 years. They selected them, they sent them to the best schools in the US, and in the meantime, given the constraints on housing there, they prepared for them their houses, their apartments. And they have them ready. So I think that instead of thinking, of course, I mean, firms are about business. But if the objective is to move towards a knowledge-based economy, innovative economy, etc., we need to get the preparation for it. And I think that those are some channels through which innovation, homegrown, led by nationals, will be implemented.
Thank you very much. R&D, I would like to positivize the message. R&D is established, it's not going to be a novelty, and it's going to grow, and you are calling our attention to the fact that somebody will have to take advantage of it, be it to create the mechanisms to use the funds and also to prepare the human resources and the skill levels that are needed for the new generation firms. Can we get your two factors?
Sure. One issue that I think is important to point out is that the UAE traditionally and conventionally in the past few decades has been a labor-intensive economy. As you pointed out in your previous presentation, the expansion of the labor force played a huge role, and the migration model that was used, that was implemented, played a massive role in terms of the economic growth that we have seen in the past few decades. And I think what we're realizing now is that we cannot continue on a labor-intensive model. We cannot continue on a growth path that is highly reliant on labor-intensive methods. So we're shifting, in a sense, from a labor-intensive economy to a knowledge economy. The good news is we're not the first people to do this, right? China is working on this, Singapore, I mean, all sorts of countries, especially from Eastern Asia, are inspirational stories for having done this. I would say the good news is we have proven, or the UAE has proven, to be an intensive adopter of technology. It has proven to absorb the capacity that is necessary to produce. And yes, maybe it's not at the level of creation. Maybe it has not created as many products and processes, given the whole previous debate about Uber and Careem, as well as Souk.com and Amazon. as has been said before, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But the point is that they've adopted technology. The UAE has adopted technology, it has adopted certain processes, and it has used the labor-intensive method. Now the question is, those two things that were done in the past were great. It has allowed the UAE to go from one of the least developed economies to one of the most developed economies. And now the question is, how do we take that to the future? So, in my opinion, the future should include two main issues. One, it should include partnerships between large firms and small firms. I think this is crucial. I think it is incredibly difficult for a startup or a typical SME to compete with a large firm that is well established in the country. I think it's almost impossible. There are cases where it has been done, but there had to be a lot of support. And I think that there should be an incentive from the private sector. The private sector should welcome, these large firms should welcome these startups because they should generate revenue for them. And so this addresses both the accountability issue that was just raised, and it also addresses the incentive issue, where we need everyone to be interested in innovation. And startups, we know from many other countries, have actually done a very good job of innovating. So it's not like this should be a very big loss. There should be an enabling environment that allows them to do so. So that's my opinion on point one. Point two, with respect to education, I think there should be more access to vocational training, and more access where there are bridges or paths that are clear and transparent from academia to industry. And this example that you said about industry making certain requests, and those requests being granted by the government, I think that's great. I think that's fine, but I think it should happen on a broader level. I don't think it should just happen on a few elite universities or school. I think on a broader level, there should be a clearer connection between academia and industry. So academia is not seen as this something in the sky sort of thing that we get from our students all the time. Okay, that's all.
Thank you.
Sure.
Actually, the innovation is very complex. They have a very complex process, multiple factors playing with the innovations. One of these factors, as the doctor is saying, is the human capital. Human capital, building human capital is one of these factors. Infrastructure, and another factor. Enterprise development, third factor. And law and regulations is important in the innovations, is other factors. Multiple player in this innovation factor. In the last 5 years in Abu Dhabi, we saw the most succeeds coming from building human capital, in my opinion, and building human capital and supporting building the infrastructure. In human capital, we have an example in ADNOC, multiple engineering working in science and technology innovation, labor working in oil and gas sector. Today we have Strata, 90% of labor working in Strata is a local engineer. And in infrastructure, we have in Abu Dhabi very strong infrastructure. One of the examples is Masdar. Masdar, they have a strong lab in the clean tech. Tawazun, another example of defense lab. Mubadala also, they have a very strong infrastructure. We have multiple incubator in Abu Dhabi as an infrastructure, strong lab also in Khalifa about ICT area. It is a collaboration between British Communications with Etisalat, and they built a very strong lab. And in this lab, some of this patent, actually, what I presented, some of them came from Khalifa University because they have a very strong lab. This is the factor what I saw in the most important in the last year. For the next year, R&D expenditure is important. We have nice infrastructure in Abu Dhabi, but we need to spend more in research and development, and also supporting the enterprise development, especially if in the early stage, because there are especially the startups, they need a lot of fund in the early stage to come to the market. So this is some gap still there, and collaboration between bank with the industrial is one of the key factor in the future in UAE.
I think we shouldn't underestimate the wisdom and foresight of the leadership of the UAE in the sense that they commenced this path of diversification much earlier than our neighbors. Comparatively, the UAE has been much more resilient recently to the drop in hydrocarbon prices, and I think that's because very early stages there was a move to diversification in petrochemical industry, investment in transportation, aviation, and maritime, for example, the ports in Jebel Ali. And this has been essential, I think, in maintaining this resilience in the UAE and setting the foundation for this development and innovation. So I think that's one big aspect, I think, and not be afraid to venture into new paths. And I think now there's a move to more of a technology focus, and I think technology is great, and infrastructure and technology to facilitate these innovations, developments are very important, very helpful. I think the second aspect is touched upon by my colleague here is legislation. I think that's essential, and a very recent example of that is developments in the bankruptcy law. We have destigmatized, in effect, failure for small, medium businesses, where there was this stigma of failing and there was this fear of criminal prosecution. If you're a manager or director of a small or medium enterprise, there was a very real risk if you went bankrupt that you would go to jail for bounced checks, for example. And I think this new legislation that helps introduce moratoriums and restructuring possibilities, including availability of financing during administration periods, is a big relief to small, medium businesses and encourages them to take risks and not be afraid of failure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will turn now to the audience. And I hope you accompany me to listen to the stories that our four panelists are telling us. The UAE has put forward a sizable budget for R&D that's available for the firms. There is human capital, a very good base, as well as a human capital base that has proven to be able to adapt innovation. And there is also infrastructure as well as an institutional framework to promote entrepreneurship and innovation. And certainly, from the last opinion, that there is already some trajectory of both vertical and horizontal horizontal integration that firms have proven to be able to use efficiently in order to grow, establish, and probably think projections about the future. Let's go back to the audience. You were there in the trenches. Do you share these views? Do you have dissenting views? And which countries would you have, which questions would you have to my panel here? Who would like to start? Over there is somebody could circle the microphone, please.
Thank you. I believe that 1% growth globally and 3% growth expected in the coming year locally in the UAE or the JCC will never drive innovation or will never satisfy new generations' aspiration. Innovation has always to make a major difference. It's like cardiovergent electric shock for a heart that's dying to bring it back to life. That's what Steve Jobs did to Kodak. Kodak did not die just because they were not innovative. It's because of the introduction of the iPod and iPad and the digital media that killed that entire industry. It killed the multi-billion-dollar industry led by Sony and Kodak at that time. I like the statement that Dr. Aisha bin Bishir, I guess, said yesterday, when she said that we're redefining even the way GDP is calculated. I do believe that innovation has to involve destruction of older models. I don't have ideas on how to do that, but I would love maybe one day in the coming few years to only hear about the World Bank in the History Museum or in the Chamber of Commerces, only to talk about them to my grandchildren that, oh, we used to have Chamber of Commerces that regulate our business. In the last few months, my company outsourced a job online for someone who lived in Germany and someone who lived in India. We did not care if he has a Chamber of Commerce license that authorized his business. The only thing I cared about is how many stars he has in his profile from people that worked before with him, how many hours that he had in his profile working for other people, and what kind of feedback and reviews people. That is my DCCI. That's my Dubai Chamber of Commerce license. I don't care if he has a, I don't know, a Hamburg City Chamber of Commerce license that authorizes him to work. That doesn't add anything to my to the credibility I'm looking for. I do believe that it's a global dilemma. It's not a local dilemma, to be honest with you. And I do believe that the UAE and Dubai is probably the best place to drive that forward. The only thing is that please do not get stuck in what people did in the 90s. I do remember when fax machines used to be the best means for communication. And when we wanted to innovate, we created apps that convert fax messages and send them to my email. I don't want fax machines anymore. Just kill them. Switch to email messages, switch to WhatsApp, switch to online apps and mobile apps. Kill old methods of doing business and stuff like that. I'm waiting for the new Apple to come in and boost the world economy by $600 billion in a couple of years, or 1 year maybe, or $1 trillion in 1 year. An idea that wipes out, that destroys older governance methods, older business communication methods, older business conducting methods, because they're old, they're dragging growth down, the slowing the progress that younger generations are looking forward for. I'm not sure if the panelists would agree with that or not, but thank you so much.
So I didn't hear a question, but I just want to comment on what you just said. First of all, I think the UAE, one of its main strengths is that it does adopt new technology, and it did get rid of the old way of doing business for the most part. So I'm not sure, what you mean by that, but the UAE, in fact, diffusion and exploitation, diffusion of technology is one of its major strengths. It's one of the indicators that boosted its innovation score. Now, with respect to your other point, I think the other point you were making was about regulation, and that is something that I think all of us have talked about to some extent. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all the panelists would agree that there is a high level of regulation, and especially for foreign firms, and to ease that regulation would help move a lot of the innovation forward.
Thank you for the comment. I was also expecting a question, but the comment is valuable enough. Could we move the...
I just want to thank all the panelists. It was a great presentation on innovation in R&D. I want to also thank Dr. Mohammed from DED on his comment about the fact that in UAE they have to have R&D, and they have to invest in locals researchers, and as you said, in Singapore, where they actually send locals to go and get the research or the information, the knowledge from abroad, from Stanford, as you said, or all the American and UK universities, good universities, and come back and invest in their own country. I think that has to be here in the UAE. It has to be the same. They have to invest locals to go get the knowledge from the US and come and invest it in the UAE. That's all. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. The way I look at the idea of transforming the model from labor-intensive to knowledge-based intensive production is not really to start with innovation, to ask the question, why was it intensive, labor-intensive production? It is because the products and services that we are produced, they needed that type of inputs. Now, if you want to change into knowledge and innovation, you have to define the products that you want. For example, if you want to produce petrochemicals, you need engineers, chemical engineers. If you want, for example, in Abu Dhabi last year, they had that plane on the solar, so they needed probably high caliber engineers. So I think instead of concentrating on innovation as such, we need to define what the products and services we need. If they require high skills, I think we will get them. Whether you make the then you make the research and development. This is the way I see it. You start with defining the products that you want, and then you get, of course, you have to be prepared, as Dr. Muhammad said. How do you prepare for the higher skilled products? By very good research institutes and universities, as Harvard, Stanford, Princeton. This is probably the way we start. And this, of course, is not tomorrow, probably the next 50 years, because you have to prepare for it.
I would like the panelists to park the question. The question is, can you move to a more proactive industrial policy and therefore enable yourself to choose where the winning game is? Could you park this question? I would like to hear another question over there.
Thank you very much. First, it's a matter of a comment. Our colleague here, he was speaking between innovation and disruption. I believe we need to distinguish between disruption and innovation. But at the same time, what the respected panelists, they have focused on the real achievements being taking place. Thank you, Mr. Faisal. And I believe within the universities in UAE and the huge investment done by the government here to encourage education and research is already there. You take, for example, along with what's been mentioned by Mr. Faisal, the UAE University, the American University in Sharjah, along with Masdar, and there's New York University in Abu Dhabi as well, and they have a lot of research departments, including the cyber security research, one of the largest in the Middle East down here. So a country which is for the past almost 4 decades has achieved what it has been achieving today. This is also something need to be distinguished and well recognized in more than 4 decades. See how much the GDP been multiplied and doubled through all these years. And I believe each stage of the economy was serving at that time what is being needed at that time. And today we have on the space, on other aspects, the whole direction of the government and the number of students studying here or abroad. The question is, I believe, is about collaboration between those research departments, and I will leave this to the panelists, and the private sector, which is mainly driving the real needs out of the societies. We have this kind of gap, I believe. There's a lot of research departments available already there, but between academia and universities, we don't have this kind of a bridge with the private sector, which is the main power driving the economy today and has been encouraged to go for as a driver.
I would like to take one more question over there, and then we will go back to the panelists.
Thank you very much. I wanted to talk about 2 types of different innovation. For the private sector, which I have my own business, innovation is born out usually of necessity, whether it's economics, whether it's to be more productive, whether it's cultural, whether we're looking at new markets overseas. Very often, us in the private sector, we will know when we need to innovate, how to innovate, and which road to go down to innovate. Yes, some of us need extra help. If we're in R&D, we're in chemicals, or in industry or whatever, we do need to hook up with certain institutions. The other type of innovation, I think, is certainly to do with very young people. And I'm talking about creating the innovators of tomorrow, the scientists of tomorrow, the thinkers of tomorrow, the kids who turn around and say, why are we doing it this way today? Why can't we do it that way today? I think that there's a missing link between business, educators, and schools. As somebody who's involved in a mentoring program, which is the InJazz program with secondary school kids, I haven't previously worked with college kids, but certainly with secondary school kids. And these kids have 15 weeks to come up with an idea, get a business model made, sell it, shares, raise money. At the end of 15 weeks, they liquidated the company, and then they go into a competition. These kids come up with some fantastic ideas, and I'm really extremely innovative ideas, and these are 16, 17-year-old kids. And I think if somehow there was a link between educators, how they're educating kids today at secondary school, and the private sector, you would be able to join the dots a lot better. I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Let's go back to here. Who would like to take up some of these questions?
I'd like to, if I may, answer the first 2 points. I think a lot of them are interconnected, I feel, in the sense that I think, yes, investing in a permanent workforce, or permanent labor force is essential. This is something that's part of the Abu Dhabi 2030 plan, one of the key points, and also Dubai 2021 plan. And I think this is important. Why? To avoid, for example, brain drain in times of difficulty, in times of recession, to have the labor force and the foundations there to achieve these ambitious goals in innovation and in development. So I think that's, without doubt, very important. Second point, I like to refer to like developing education and educational structures. Speaking from my own personal experience, I'm a lawyer by trade, and I find the legal field here, no disrespect to what existing universities here, but there traditionally was a focus on litigation and certain sectors of the legal profession. There's a long way to go in developing the legal profession locally in terms of training future lawyers, future legal professionals in contracts, drafting of contracts, and commercial contracts. And unfortunately, there's an over-reliance on international firms and international know-how. And I hope that, that's one example of where educational systems and institutions need to catch up with the super fast developments and changes that are happening in the country. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just address all 3 questions very briefly. The first question was actually quite fair. You made the argument that, I guess it was in response to me saying that we want to transfer from a labor-intensive economy to a knowledge economy, and you were saying that the reason it was labor-intensive is because that was the demand. That was what was demanded. Okay, and that's a very fair argument. However, there is something that is missing here, which is many firms, in order to attract FDI, foreign direct investment globally, and in order to attract headquarters, something that was a missing link in Abu Dhabi, many firms would come here, but they don't necessarily want to bring their headquarter of the region here, right? And if we want to do that, we have to convince them that we have we're transitioning to a knowledge-based economy. We have to convince them that we have ample engineers, we have ample software analysts, we have people trained in ICT, aka information and communication technologies. We have to convince them, right? If we present ourselves as a labor-intensive economy, this is not going to attract the level of FDI that we want. And it's not going to allow us to leverage the trade partnerships and integrate ourselves into a global research network the way we want. So I think one example of that is Neopharma. When they joined a venture with Biocon and Neo Biocon became the first biotech company in the region, right? I don't think that's something that could have happened easily if Biocon was not convinced that this workforce is fairly skilled, right? If they didn't think the workforce was skilled, why would they partner with a firm here? So I think that's, I think you're right. There is a lot of demand-driven arguments, but there's also a way to pull. There are also a way to pull multinational firms in and to have these joint ventures that could really boost productivity and increase innovation. And I think that the increase and the boost in the pharmaceutical industry in the past just few years, really, it has not even been a decade, has been really amazing. With respect to the other two questions that were posed, I think they're very similar. The questions, as far as I understand, were arguing that there should be a connection between academia and industry. At least that's how I understood it. Schools, universities, I don't want to say universities, but schools, any sort of post-secondary training, whether that's vocational or education or colleges, whatever the case may be, you're saying there should be a connection between schooling, any sort of post-secondary schooling, and then industry. And I completely agree with that, and I even mentioned that briefly. How that happens depends on the legislation and the policy that incentivizes that. But yes, for the both of you, I completely agree.
Yeah, I thought that you're not going to mention the concept of industrial policy. We tried to avoid that, but because we need another seminar here for 2 days to discuss the issue. But I think the point is well taken. It's very difficult to identify the products and services that we want. It's an issue of demand and supply. They interact. And if you take the most advanced country in the world, the US, many of the innovations have been made by foreign engineers who settled in Silicon Valley. So when you have the skills, you can create the products that in turn create the market or the demand, you see? It's not really an issue of what are you going to produce today, and we will respond to that, and that may take some time. Just another point which is quite important. When we talk about, of course, the issue of productivity, I mean, the UAE can continue in the future with reliance on expats. And expats, you can design a policy that will attract the skills, and therefore that will foster productivity. But what is even more important is to increase the reliance on the national skills in the future. And frankly, I mean, given the relative size of the national population, I think the objective should be to have the highest productivity possible, the highest skills possible. And frankly, I don't know why there is no program, there is no policy to divert the local labor force from the civil service, from the public sector to the private sector. And it's just a win-win policy. Productivity will increase, growth will be more sustainable in the future, there will be high skills, and everybody will be gaining. And it seems, and forgive me to add this before I stop, I really don't think that the government should feel to have the moral obligation to take in the public sector the youth. I will be willing to invest in the human capital, to invest in you. If you just graduate from high school and you are looking for a job in the public sector, I will not accept you. Why should I accept you? I shouldn't have any moral obligation to accept you. I will be ready to invest in your education, to push you to the highest level, and to incentivize you to go and set up your business, work as engineer in the private sector, etc. And it seems to me, from the numbers and the figures that we show, we see 85% of the national labor force is in the public sector. And we know what the productivity of the public sector is. So I think there is a question mark. I mean, the focus should be on human capital to get the highest skills possible among nationals, granted that the contribution to overall productivity will have to continue to come to a large extent from foreign skills, but there is a lot that can be done to enhance productivity through the accumulation of the national human capital.
Thank you. Let me take a couple of more questions before we move to the forward-looking agenda, and that will be the last part of our session today. Yes, please.
Very much. I took a note to make my question brief and short. Let me just read it through. Dr. Wifag actually identified some of the challenges and constraints that startups and SMEs face in the current business environment. I think these could be crucial factors that hinder startups in their efforts to penetrate the market and succeed. I think these are very important factors. So I feel the inevitable question is how policymakers and regulatory authorities tackle such shortfalls that are largely overlooked by them. How can they address and eliminate these obstacles to create a more efficient and friendlier business environment? Sometimes certain technologies are already available, but we don't have access to it, such as VoIP calls. As far as I know, amongst the GCC nations, the UAE is the only country that bans the use of VoIP calls, and I wish I knew why. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. The microphone over there.
Extending the same question, Ashwin here, VAT and reporting compliances are coming in UAE. With this, basically, the SMEs have to get ready with more structured way of data capturing, data presentation, and compliance submissions. How should we look at it in terms of making them ready? Should they be doing skill enhancements, or should they be replacing the skills with getting new skilled manpower across?
And the last one on the side, please.
Hi, first, thank you for the presentation and for the panelists for their all presentation and the information that they share with us today. My question is that I'll come back to what Lady said before, because yes, do we have programs, because as I can see, just as David, not all doctors has to be good in IT, and not all, lawyers has to be good in engineering. So how are we gonna have programs to know exactly from the beginning? We don't have to wait until the one will be 20 or 20 years old, then he will be focused on engineering or medicine. Can we have programs that will make the human capital for the schools will be focused from, 10 years or 12 years old, that they're gonna be good in engineering, they're gonna be good in doctors, and we have programs for that. This is the first one. The second thing, as they said, there is a big gap between the academia with the universities and the industries, because we have a statement said that's hajam al-ikhtira, which means the demand is the mother of innovation. So when we have academia's people, and when we have problems that we are facing in industry, they don't know exactly what's going on there. They just give them the problems and they try to solve it while they are in the office or in the labs. They have to go there. The main innovative things that happening when the R&D will be inside the industries. So they will face it. They will know what's the demand, and after that they will have with innovative ideas. So we have to find a connection between the industries, whatever it is. It's tourism, it's in IT, it's manufacturing, and the academia. They have
lab. However, the miscommunication, miscoordinations between these, between the industry
Completely agree with that. I also think, I mean, to kind of get to both questions, you know, the that requires a certain discussion. When should vocational education start? When should in that regard a little bit. And it all depends on legislation and the extent to which policymakers is important for a very large percentage of the population. Not everyone, but a very significant portion of the population, in my opinion,